So welcome everyone to the Pluriversal Design Book Club, and this is a project of the Pluriversal Design Special Interest Group of the Design Research Society. And our focus is on so many different things. I guess I should get into the focus of this book club. We are focused or interested in design practice, particularly outside of Europe and North America. And then the focus of this book club is on supporting other designers as they decolonize their bookshelves. And so we really always focus on the work of thinkers who we think are important to designers who want to change up their worldview, their practice. And we have themes over different periods of time. So we were focused on, we started off with Latin American thinkers, then we went to indigenous authors, then we were looking at the work of Black authors, and then now this semester we are continuing the work of Black authors, but actually these first two sessions we're focusing on Caribbean authors, and Mariana Braga offered to do this first book club for us. So Mariana, I'm going to hand over to you and you can introduce yourself and introduce the work. So over to you, Mariana.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you for introducing. Welcome everyone once more. I'm very happy today to share some thoughts on Sylvia Wynter's work. And I am Mariana. I am a designer and a research associate in ImaginationLancaster in the United Kingdom. So I am a Latin American, Brazilian. And I think the discussion today is very important for us also to reflect on the implications for design and also for our senses of equity and social justice. So I think Sylvia Wynter's work helps us a lot to rethink what it means to be human. And I would like to start today with a question, instead going directly to the presentation, that I hope the presentation is going to be more a conversation rather than me talking about. I tried to capture the main points of the text that we will work on today and discuss. However, I think the presentation that I will going to do will never replace the reading of Sylvia Wynter's work. So my question for you, if you want to put the answer in the chat or to speak out, please feel free, is what does it mean to be human for you? Ability to change, great. Great. Being connected to other humans, brilliant. And for myself, for instance, I think a lot it is about the capacity to create different from other animals, constantly learning and adapting, brilliant. To be human, to experience a wide range of emotions in my day-to-day. Great. Great. To attempt to know and worship the Creator and creation. Having agency over my own day-to-day experience to communicate. Very nice, very nice. So, to be a broadcasting system to the infinite responsibility and feel free and free will, sorry, to be surprised and to discover. Thank you. Thank you. I think it is, all the answers are brilliant, and I think we can also reflect on them after the presentation and after looking at the ideas of Sylvia Wynter. I will try to share my screen and we can get back to what it means to be human after the presentation. And please feel free to speak out at any moment in the presentation, and we can stop and discuss. Can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. So today, the synthesis that I'm going to present is about a chapter that is called Before Men, Sylvia Wynter's Rewriting of the Modern Episteme by Denise Ferreira da Silva. And before going directly to the chapter, I would like to share some thoughts that I had just after reading several times the text. And it is about what Sylvia Wynter's scholarship meant and how I thought about that after reading the text. Sylvia Wynter's work makes the invisible visible. Her scholarship is liberating and critical to understanding the foundations of racial difference and its implications for our modern society. Things that we tend to take for granted as we are born in already colonized worlds that incorporated into the juridical, political, social, and economic architectures our institutions contingent upon Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color, the particular meaning of being human as a universal man that invalidates and neglects all other ways of being human that were there before men, namely the title of Ferreira da Silva's chapter that we will look into today. Sylvia Wynter opens our eyes and shows how the changes in episteme that our institutions are grounded in denied not only what is valid knowledge, but also what are valid ways of being or a politics of being that defines power as well. And I hope that today we will be able to understand these ideas better and also to discuss what Sylvia Wynter's thoughts mean and can mean for our design practices, research, and knowledge. And Sylvia Wynter is this fascinating woman that writes not only philosophical essays and scientific papers, but also she writes novels, plays, and also she performed different roles, such as a dancer and an actress. She was born in Cuba, but she is a daughter of Jamaican parents, and she lived in different countries, such as Cuba, Jamaica, Sweden, and the United Kingdom, beyond the United States. And Denise's analysis on Sylvia Wynter's contribution mentions several times the text Unsettling the Coloniality of Being, Power Through Freedom, that is a powerful text that questions what it means to be human and calls for refiguring our idea of humanness. And one important point that this text is built upon and arts about is this quotation that I shared here, that is, the argument proposes that the struggle of our new millennium will be one between the ongoing imperative of securing the well-being of our present ethno-class conception of the human man, which overrepresents itself as if it were the human itself. Any thoughts you would like to share about this quotation? Please feel free just to jump into.
Hey, Mariana, it's Kisa.
Hi,
Yeah.
Kesa. Nice to have you here.
I'm excited because I read everything. I definitely believe that we need a new definition of humanity, because whatever definition of humanity that has been being used, whether because of globalism, I mean, our whole society is based upon capitalism, white supremacy, imperialism, and colonialism. And so like, the definition of humanity that we're seeing today is definitely not the definition that we want to move forward with in the future. And so this like revived my energy on how, you know, exactly what she's saying. Like I was so happy that you shared her work, because now it's part of me too. So thank you.
Brilliant, Kesa. This is a great point and summarizes very well. That is the same thoughts I share as well. And about this need to refigure this sense of humanity. And you described it brilliantly. And I am very happy that you are here today, because you provide such a critical thinking about the things you read and participate in. So super happy that you are here as well. And Catherine, that is the editor of this book, and this chapter is in, she synthesized as well about Sylvia Wynter's ideas not being about replacing or occupying Western conceptions of what it means to be human, but being about the possibility of undoing and unsettling these conceptions of men. And the chapter itself talks a lot about this, and especially about how the European colonial projects are neglected, for instance, in the modern thought, in the structures, when we talk about structures of knowledge and power, and how these European colonial projects participate in this institution of racial difference, and that this is a human signifier that is still informing our institutions. And just summarizing, it points out the gaps that we see in the modern philosophical and scientific projects, and about how the ethical implications of colonial projects were not considered when we put the notions of humanity itself. So we have this human being that was shaped based on the notions of the European man, that is actually produced by these modern philosophical and scientific projects that created this opposite pairs throughout time. When we talk about medieval times, there was the opposite pair of the spirit flesh. And in the modern thought, we have the opposite pair that helps to categorize the man as rational, irrational. And with the biocentric view, for instance, that is brought by Darwin, we have the naturally selected and the naturally deselected. And all these notions are still informing our juridical, political, societal, and economic architectures. And a clear example of these colonial architectures is the establishment of the state and the law, that at least myself, I don't think every day about how the states were defined. I was born in a place that is already, I know this space as an state, right? And so there are these descriptive statements of what it means to be human, and they corresponding ethics that create the space of otherness, or the space of order of race and of racial difference, that are all the other ways of being that do not fit those structures are rendered, for instance, irrational. And this chapter brings three main points that explains how this institution of racial difference becomes a human signifier. The first point is about the naturalization of man. The man is seen as a biological and natural thing. The second one is about how colonial domination works as an instrument of power. And the third one is about how the modern thought and modern thinkers actually instrument the racial and cultural difference. So I will start from the first point about the explaining the naturalization of man. Please feel free to jump into at any moment that you would like to comment anything, and it will be most welcome. So about the naturalization of man, there is this idea, for instance, of the classical order of Foucault, that we think about these as orders of truth and knowledge, but actually they act also as a political grid when it puts rationality in the writing of the human difference. So we have this rational, irrational pair that actually recasts the naturally selected and the naturally deselected by evolution from Darwin. And these both pairs work as representations of difference that inform colonial, juridical, and economic architectures. So this first part of the chapter explains these points. And starting from talking about how these categorizations that define what it means to be human and their modalities of subjugation are still at work globally, present in our structures and infrastructures worldwide. And that is very interesting. I really like this part because when we think about the imaginaries of the colonizer, that they imagined that there were no people in the Americas, and so that there were no other cultures, other peoples there. And this comes from this idea as well, and their mindset connected to this quotation that I put here, that is, the medieval spirit-flesh pair established distinctions between the spiritual perfection of the heavens as opposed to the sublunar realm of Earth. With this, the geography of the Earth is also being divided up between its temperate regions centered in Jerusalem and those realms that, because outside of this grace, had to be uninhabitable. This spatial and ideological narrative would be disproved by the Portuguese travels to the Americas, as those geographies outside grace were, in fact, inhabited. So I think it is very interesting because even if they discovered that there were other peoples and cultures there, it doesn't change very much their behavior towards other peoples and cultures, and towards the invalidation of other kinds of knowledges and worldviews, in my point of view. If anyone would like to add something, please feel free. And so the space of otherness of those outside grace who were hindered irrational is reshaped through the rational-irrational pair. This space of otherness is represented by the bodies and territories subjected to colonial power. And I think this is very important because it is the materialization about what our bodies mean, even when we are silent, for instance, because our bodies talk within those structures. And would anyone would like to comment on that?
If nobody does, I would, but I'll wait. Okay, I'll go. A lot of my designs are based upon like ecology, like specifically cultural ecology, which is an African-centered principle. And so when I think about the word sovereignty, I choose, like, I'm a designer, I'm a design strategist and researcher, and I choose to work in the food systems. So sovereignty is a huge word when it comes to like our food and like how we should produce it, how like we should grow our food, what seeds we should use. Like those things are all a part of like my framework when I'm designing, like, you know, who's producing it. And so like this theory of sovereignty, like this kind of touched me someplace. And I just wanted to see like what people thought, because in my mind, because I am a designer always at the basis, even though I work in the food system, design sovereignty is very real to me, because I should be able to use the tools of my ancestors to be able to navigate the space instead of the tools that's been given to me within my design education, because to me, they're breaking tools. They're not bridging tools that like build a new reality. They maintain the same reality. And it was always my choice. And even though I was going against the grain and speaking truth to power, it was always my choice to have that design sovereignty, to be able to work with the communities, because I feel like communities know what the problem is. They know their solution. They don't need academia and government coming in saying, well, this is what, no, they already know the problem. They already know their solutions. So for me as a designer, how do I amplify and galvanize that space and facilitate the design process so their vision can be implemented? You know, so I would love to hear more people talk about that.
Would anyone else would like to share some thoughts? Thank you, Kessa. This was amazing.
I just wanted to say that I completely agree with what she's saying. And I have a lot of trouble trying to find tools or to, you know, adapt tools that were already created in the design field that can actually work in contexts that are not North American or European contexts. So I think this is a struggle, and I'm always trying to find either my own tools or create new tools with people from other contexts as well.
Thank you, Jananda.
Actually, I'll jump in here for 2 minutes, not 2 minutes, 2 seconds. We started a conversation within the DRS about being an existential crisis. And I see this as like the existential crisis for me. I don't know how other people feel about this, you know, like how do we, you know, our role is changing as we change our point of view and we adopt different maybe worldviews and mindsets. You know, what's the new role that we're going to take on as designers? You know, that's some of the struggle for me. And maybe, you know, what Kisa said about breaking tools and not bridging tools, that's been my kind of search. You know, what are the new tools that we're going to create then in this new design practice? And I'll pass the word back to you.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you. And yeah, but I think a lot about mindsets and how many worldviews we have been losing all these years and through these infrastructures of design as well, not just that are quite colonized. And for instance, even if we think about the boundaries of a state and that peoples don't organize themselves, these indigenous cultures that are over 6,000 indigenous peoples across Americas, they are not going to, even nowadays, to organize themselves according to boundaries of states. And I think it is not just the physical aspect, but also about in the plural, how many knowledges and opportunities of learning we have been losing as designers in this world, not just of making, but conceiving worlds that are equitable, for instance, more sustainable. And a lot of the Sylvia Wynter's criticism goes also around Foucault's classical thought that puts the man as a natural thing, overrepresented in a way that all other ways of being human would be symbolically denied. And this classical view of man also makes it hard to differentiate between human beings and other natural things. And this is a quite long quotation, but I thought that it would be very important to read this fully. So I know that sometimes people don't get the chance to read all the text before this session. So I wanted to put it in full because it shows a kind of transition between the Charles Darwin's ideas of the naturally selected and the selected, kind of recasted in the lines of colors of peoples. So I can read it, or would like anyone to read it? I can read it with my accent, Latin accent here. So it is talking about these Charles Darwin's ideas about this selected and deselected by evolution. Differentially categorize all the colonized, darker-skinned natives of the world and the darker-skinned, poorer European peoples themselves. The new master code, a purely scientific one, divided the world into the selected and deselected. Within this Darwinian context, the figure of man is overrepresented as human according to a principle of non-homogeneity, which is embodied in the new line. Dubois was to identify as the color line, that is, a line drawn between the lighter and the darker peoples of the earth, and enforced at the level of social reality by the law-likely instituted relations of socioeconomic dominance, subordination between them. The color line would replace the previous code's medieval classical in order to enable selected, deselected, and thus deserving, undeserving status organizing principle that it encoded to function for the nation state as well as the imperial orders of the Western bourgeoisie. So but I think it is very important because it talks about a formalization and how the question of racial difference becomes encoded even at the juridical level. So because of this, I wanted to read this. And this comment is also based in this text, the mythology of modern law, that shows and analyzes the law, showing that the law is contingent upon Black, indigenous, and peoples of color. And so Foucault's man describes the ways of being human that is found in Europe and differentiates it from other ways of being human found in other regions. And what Sylvia Wynter argues about and clarifies, it is a lot about how this shifts in episteme from the medieval flesh, spirit, the classical rational, irrational categorization, and the biocentric from Darwin, selected, deselected, were not only shifts in order of knowledge, truth, but also in the politics of being. And so I understood this is also defining power when that model of human is to be desired. Would like to add something? Anyone?
I can add a quick thing. It's been amazing so far. I think what you were saying about sort of the desirability of genres of humans, or the desirability of one being over another, is really powerful. And I know definitely when I transitioned and started being perceived as a woman, there was this very sort of seismic shift in the way that my power, my ideas were desired in different contexts, but especially in design contexts. And I think that, yeah, being able to look at this in through the lens of desirability and through the lens of how people are drawn or respect or love is, yeah, a really important point. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great point. And going to the second point that the text made is how this Foucault's view of power does not systematically considers the colonial domination and so his classical order, not considering this colonial domination and its role in creating racial and cultural difference, is the point that Sylvia Wynter's build upon and shows also that his rational-irrational pair recasts the medieval spirit flesh, or based on religious beliefs, and his universal reason, actually putting only one reason for being human, for human beings, divide and sustain the European overrepresented man. And so our bodies become subjects of this classification as well, being framed according to modern thought pairs, such as rational, irrational, selected, deselected, perfection, imperfection, pure, and impure. And the human being represents the rational European, creating spaces of otherness that are denied. The human is divided into the rational European and its irrational American, African, Asian, Australian, the others. And the third point that this text emphasizes is about how the modern thought descriptions, these descriptions that we have been talking about, of the human, are still present globally, defining our infrastructures and institutions, and even our notions of humanity. This particular European descriptive statement of human are still playing a role in formal global norms, and that has this notion of humanity with this overrepresented man. And the ideas of inclusion and diversity that we discuss a lot nowadays, for instance, in our policies, in our even organizational policies beyond government policies, are actually additions to infrastructures and institutional mechanisms already contingent upon Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color. And this is one part that I would like to read full, because I think it is another part that is very hard to synthesize the ideas, and I think it is important for the discussion afterwards. The texts that guide the framing and working of the current political, juridical, economic figures, such as nation states, multinational corporations, international non-governmental organizations, multilateral bodies, and so forth, the products of the biocentric code, the social categories that are aligned with racial, gender, and sexual difference, have been integrated into the political text as proper political signifiers whose inclusion will fulfill modern democratic claims. That is, these power knowledge effects are here to stay insofar as they are encoded in juridical texts. The problem is that these very global juridical architectures also deploy a particular thread of humanity as a moral signifier that is also the ethical gauge for the members of the global polity. Curiously, the conception of humanity circulated privileging dignity and diversity as descriptions of the human, tags that are added to the already operating attributes of freedom and equality, remains the same one articulated in post-enlightenment knowledge that is actually related to these notions of modern thought based in modern thinkers. And I think this is very serious. This is very serious because we are talking about formal structures that sometimes define even the chance and opportunities of people and keep them in vicious cycles throughout life. And so Denise concludes proposing a reflection in a direction towards refiguring what it means to be human. And she proposed that instead of focusing on questions of who and what we are, we need to look more about the methodology or about how we come up with answers to the questions. So to focus more in the epistemology of how we consider knowledge and reliable knowledge and truths, rather than the ontology about who and what we are.
Mariana, what does she mean? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sorry, Casa?
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you elaborate on it a little bit? Because it's a lot for me to digest, but it sounds like...
Yeah, so, sure. Yeah.
She's asking you to, I guess, asking us to discuss this a little bit, you know, so
yeah,
what's that question about, you know?
Yeah, but I was giving time for people to read as well.
But this is like a really good point. Like, I really want to kind of like digest it. I want to hear what other people thought.
But I don't agree fully, because I think, Kessa, and this is perhaps it is a personal view of mine, but I think it is very hard to distinguish who you are about how you come up with your proofs about the world. So I think a lot about, for instance, when I am trying to understand how design can contribute to equity and how design can be undone, I think it is also about people's worldviews, that in my point of view, it is connected to their ontologies, who they are and what are their beliefs. So I don't see as Denise sees it. So perhaps I am not corroborating what she says, because I see ontology and epistemology very connected instead of separated things, because how we come up with answers to questions, our methodologies, I think it is about also who we are, the things we learned from our ancestors and so on, the values we hold.
When I see this question, though, I think, or I've had to reflect more and more over time, that the reality is my mind is colonized, and so, if we look at the question of how we come up with answers to the questions, I am always answering these questions through a colonized perspective. And, I'm trying to decolonize and trying to unlearn.
Yep.
But, when I think about this question, this further investigation into how we come up with answers, I guess maybe that's some of the kind of questions that I'm starting to, and yes, I am thinking about who I am, but I'm just recognizing more and more what are the factors that created my perspective on the world, and open it up to other people as well.
Maybe what is suggested here is exactly what you're saying, Mariana. It's going outside of your own epistemology and ontology to try to understand a way to answer this question. So it's an investigation first. I don't know.
I kind of like that. Like, okay, a lot of what I do, because I come from ecology, I come from an ecological perspective, but from a African psychology perspective, it's this term called design of living, where you have to ingest and understand how people see patterns of how they see the world. And patterning is what you call a creative thinking tool. Like, there's various creative thinking tools, and I feel like humility is one of them, empathy, synthesizing, all these things that we use to kind of make a way of how we live and how we choose to decide to be in the world, in the space. And I like what she's saying, because she's trying to rewire us, like our consciousness level, because a lot of times we don't get a chance to talk about our consciousness. We don't get a chance to talk about cosmology or anything spiritual within, the professional space of like how we choose, like why we act like I come up with questions, and it was because of Leslie Ann. Let me tell y'all, it was really because of Leslie Ann and something she wrote about emancipatory design in 2016 that intrigued me as a learning designer to ask certain questions of myself and of other people. But I can't ask certain questions of other people if I don't like seek to answer them for myself, and like, how do we struggle with that? Like this, like, I don't know, that like what you just shared, Mariana, like kind of sparked that space. And I was wondering, like, how do other people proceed when they're designing? Like, what questions do they ask themselves? Like, how do they spark this consciousness in yourself and other people?
Let me jump in. I really think that for you to start to interact the world through another cosmology, another epistemology, you can't go only with your mind. It's not something that you say, okay, I'm going to think differently and I'm going there, because it's a way of being, it's a mode of being. So entering in another cosmology, in another ontology, demands practice, really practice being. So usually when you go and start to practice African cosmologies, indigenous cosmologies, it's a lot of practicing, drumming, singing, dancing, interacting with people, being together, eating together, cooking. So it's a way of being. So we can't think our way to these other ways. We have to be, to become, to be able to act. And it's something that is sometimes I think people forget, simply forget. And I know that someone that I really admire, and Leslie also admire, is the Boaventura de Souza Santos. And he says that there are some steps for epistemology from the South. First is knowing that the South exists, because people don't know. Second is learning to go to the South. So, but go to the South is not just, okay, let's visit with the same mind. It's like just being together, living in that way. And then when you spend time enough in the South, you danced enough, you sang enough, you spend enough time there, you are able to create from the point of view of the South. But I really think that when we have to create tools, we have to create practice, is that just how to become, how to be in those other ways, that we are not trying to think our way in a way that is very colonized, detached, just our minds and the rest. So this is my point of view.
Thank you.
I agree, Mariana. I really appreciate your points. And to build on what Leslie-Anne was saying, I've been struggling a lot with unlearning, but knowing what my unlearning does when I am co-constructing and researching with other groups, and how my bias and understanding might play into that, even if we're co-constructing something together. And I've been really grappling with the problematic elements within empathy, trying to, as you said, I'm working with them, trying to understand if you're with them long enough, but I still recognize that spending a certain amount of time does not translate into the same lived experience as some of these communities and groups. And so I'm sort of grappling with what is enough of an understanding versus what is sort of my own constructed knowledge about my perceived view of what's happening. I don't know if that makes sense.
Thank you, everyone. I think a whole great points combined, and I think a lot about it's not about ourselves, how we bring other peoples who are in those realities, and can we incorporate this in our epistemes. I don't need to become them, in this sense, about who I am, that perhaps sometimes I think there are conditions that empathy can be quite cynical. I think we talked about that in the last session of the book club, and recognize as well when, you are talking from another place. And if you are designing with communities, I think it's to be open for them to really design with you and to position themselves during these processes together. And I think we are still learning to do that. We don't master it, in my point of view, yet.
And what's the meaning of mastering? That's another point.
Oh, you know what? I got a meaning for mastery. Why I chose to sleep, eat, and breathe design to become a master was that I knew that I was going to be very value driven. I was going to be intuitive. I was seeking past competency based stuff. I was going to be value driven, principled, intuitive, and I was going to be sensitive to context and content. And that's what I chose. to be a master in that space in this time to facilitate change and transformation, because that's who I choose to be every day. Like, I don't choose to be at 8 o'clock or 5 o'clock. I'm typically that every day. And even my children, they be like, Mama, I ain't want to ask that deep of a question. Well, yes, you do. We live in a certain type of world, but that's just who I am.
Yeah, there are some comments on the chat. If you would like to talk about them, please feel free.
I'm just going to read Laura's comment. Laura, are you going to speak? No. Because I think that this is a great point about, the use of like games and performance and futures to become someone else, even if temporarily. So Laura, I'm really just reading your comment, right? But they're often disregarded as frivolous because we're judging their impact from the perspective of rationality and science. And I'm sure that I know I've certainly had that experience where in a lot of like design sprints or design activities, I really go over the top with the theatricality. And then I wonder, how are people judging and evaluating this? But I think it's an important part of the process to sometimes bring people out of what they perceive as rationality and take them to a different place by whatever means we can.
Dancing, singing.
Renata, I got one more question before we go on. What are your thoughts on becoming? Because we talked about being, what is your thoughts on becoming?
I think you're never there. That's the thing. That's the beauty of becoming. So when you accept that you're never going to be there, you can be completely present with being. So that's my thoughts on becoming. That you understand that you are, if you're practicing, if you're acting, you are transforming, but you understand that you're never going to be completely there.
That's so Zen Buddhist.
Harris, would you like to comment on your message on the chat? That's interesting.
I don't know that it is any more profound than anything else anyone else has shared, but it was just coming to mind that capitalism tends to push a lot on the value of like what we can do, what we can produce. So I thought the idea of being becomes so important because that's a direct departure away from that. And so I just wanted to make sure that we remember that, because I think a lot of times, especially as designers, a lot of our process or thought is, at the end of the day, what do I output? Like, what am I testing? Or like, what is the thing that I present? And being able to shift away from that helps us challenge. It's like, maybe that isn't how we envision the end of our process.
This is so important to say, because even in our personal lives, we're always struggling with that, because the whole system is made for us to be productive, to become citizens. And I feel like the choices we make every day, when are you working, when are you not working, or how you value yourself through your productivity. This is so oppressive on everyone, actually, that is part of the system. So it's always a constant exercise to remember that and to make better choices, thinking of that, acknowledging that.
Yeah, and I think also there are so different worldviews that we neglect even without, how may I say, like for some indigenous peoples, there are no the sense of work. Work has no meaning because there is not work, there is not the sense of productivity that underpins our global contexts, let's say like this. So but I think also how to incorporate sense that brings values that are more collective for our societies is is a challenge as well nowadays. How we break this kind of worldviews and structures and enable people to thrive in a different direction, in a different way. What underpins life at the end of the day, beyond the sense of productivity and work and so on. Perhaps, yeah.
So we have 3 minutes, and I guess we open up the floor to see who's going to jump in these 3 minutes. Laura and Kisa have an interesting conversation going. Laura, we want to hear your voice.
I know, Laura. She bringing some stuff, right? Mariana,
I just went to grab a glass of water, and but I mean, this has been a wonderful community and conversation today, and I would love to hear more about the embodiment exercises that you mentioned, because I have been getting very interested in, you know, somatic therapies and different things that as they relate to experiential futuring.
Mariana, you rocked. This had me like, I just got so many thoughts. Thank you.
All right, I guess, well, I would also like to say thank you, Mariana. I've had Sylvia Wynter's work on my mind for a little while. So, you know, I was glad that you brought it directly in and you said, okay, let's talk about Sylvia Wynter as designers, you know, and that brought us to the Caribbean where I'm from. And, you know, I think it's important for us to think about a lot of these questions about, I enjoyed just the idea of universal man, you know, and how do we push back against that? Our next session, well, I mean, everyone can give Mariana a great round of applause.